to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. This is the second in a series of programs I'm doing on loneliness and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. I commented last week that there is a consensus among the famous thinkers that loneliness is part of the human condition. Married or single, with children or without, having friends, or being friendless. Everyone, it seems, experiences some degree of loneliness. Among the questions to be addressed in this series are the following. Is loneliness an inevitable part of the human condition? Writer Thomas Wolfe penned the following words. Loneliness is the central and inevitable fact of human existence. Is this true? Another question. What are some of the chief causes of loneliness? And is it possible to be more lonely when with people than when alone? Thoreau commented, we are, for the most part, more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our own chambers. What do you think? And some other questions I'll be dealing with. How should we deal with our feelings of loneliness? And is there anything significant we can do to greatly reduce our loneliness? First, a brief review. It's true that we can be alone and not feel lonely. For example, when listening to music, or when absorbed in a book, or maybe in our work. Well, if we can be alone and not feel lonely, what constitutes loneliness? Well, loneliness is a feeling of sadness caused by our awareness of being alone. Sister Wendy Beckett is a nun who is one of the world's experts on art. Sister Wendy lives alone in a trailer in Great Britain. She's considered to be a cloistered nun. In any event, Sister Wendy has distinguished between solitude and loneliness. And here is her distinction. She says solitude is satisfying. It doesn't want. In contrast to loneliness, it's needy. It wants. How common is loneliness? Psychiatrist Howard Cutler points out that in the last 20 years, psychologists have begun to study loneliness in a scientific manner, so that many surveys and studies of people have been undertaken to find out how common or uncommon loneliness is. Dr. Cutler says that studies show that virtually all people report that they do experience loneliness, either currently or in the past. In one large study undertaken in the United States, 1/4 of all adults reported that they had felt extremely lonely at least once in the previous 2 weeks. And research suggests that teenagers and other young adults are as likely to report feeling lonely as elderly people. What are some of the chief causes of loneliness? Well, a lack of caring and sharing. When our expectation for caring and sharing is not met, that can cause loneliness. Also, a lack of meaningful communication. Last week, to illustrate this point, I quoted briefly from a Simon and Garfunkel song, a very famous one. And in the naked night, I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking, listening without hearing, writing songs that voices never shared. Emerson, on the subject of a lack of meaningful communication, said this: "I cannot go to the houses of my nearest relatives because I do not want to be alone." Thoreau put it this way: "We never exchange more than 3 words with a friend in our lives on that level to which our thoughts and feelings habitually rise." Another cause of loneliness: our mask wearing. Some of the great thinkers have said that our great use of words is to hide our thoughts. Also, isn't it true that all of us at times say what we think others want to hear rather than what we really think, rather than what we are really feeling? Thoreau put it this way: "And why should I speak to my friends? For how rarely it is that I am I, and are they then they." Charles Dickens, in his famous A Tale of Two Cities, said this. He said that every human being is constituted to be a secret and mystery to every other human being. Another cause of loneliness: the unavailability of someone to communicate with who is at our level of awareness. An example: I know a brilliant young European man who is very empathetic, very sensitive, and very compassionate. Again, in addition to being brilliant. Well, I can tell you, he has trouble finding a soulmate with whom to communicate. And a fourth cause of loneliness. Indeed, some people would list this first. A very important cause of loneliness is sorrow. The idea is that when we are sad, it's often accompanied by a feeling of loneliness. And what might be some examples of this? Well, I think it's fair to say if we are enduring a serious, prolonged illness, that can be a lonely feeling. Or a divorce. Or the death of a loved one. Again, sorrow is often lonely. Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, talked at length about the connection between suffering and loneliness. And here are his own words: "Each person must acknowledge that even in suffering, he is unique and alone in the universe. No one can relieve him of his suffering or suffer in his place." And a further cause of loneliness is love. Yes, love can be a cause of loneliness. Sociologist Clark Moustakis provides some illumination here. He said, and I'm quoting him, "To love is to be lonely. Every love is eventually broken by illness, separation, or death." or death. Isn't it true that love is often accompanied by a fear of being alone, the fear of losing our loved one? Isn't this fear a species of loneliness? Psychologist Joyce Brothers, and many others have commented that sex can often be a cause of loneliness. Yes, sex. How so? Well, let me explain. Dr. Joyce Brothers, in one of her books, has reprinted a letter that she once got from someone on this subject. And let me quote briefly from the letter. "My husband and I enjoy great sex, but sometimes I almost wonder whether it's worth it because of the depression that follows. Dr. Joyce Brothers wrote back to this person the following. Again, these are Dr. Joyce Brothers' words. The sadness you feel after sex isn't as unusual as you might imagine. Many men and women feel a sense of loss and deprivation when the passionate glow fades. Perhaps it's the contrast that depresses, or the knowledge that no matter how much we love and are loved in return, it cannot last forever. Ultimately, we are all alone, and most of us prefer to forget this basic fact about our existence. Psychiatrist Rollo May has also commented on the prevalence of loneliness after sex, even good sex. And here are his own words. Again, psychiatrist Rollo May. Probably in lovemaking, there is always some element of sadness. This sadness comes from the reminder that we have not succeeded absolutely in losing our separateness. It's also a reminder that none of us ever overcomes his loneliness completely. For those who just tuned in, I'm doing a series of programs on loneliness, and I'm in the midst of talking about what might be some of the chief causes of loneliness. In a future program, I'll be talking about what the great thinkers claim we can do to reduce our loneliness. Another cause of loneliness is ignorance of others' suffering. Ignorance of others' suffering, which is generally accompanied by self-absorption. The feeling that I'm the only one who feels frustrated and angry and unhappy. Why is it that others are so happy, but I'm so unhappy? Why is life so difficult for me, so easy for others? Why is he sitting pretty? Why is she sitting pretty, but not me? Is there anything wrong with this kind of thinking? It's true that some people have serious financial problems and others don't. It's true that some people are in good health and others aren't. But the fact of the matter is that life has its peaks and valleys. Things can be going very well today, but change dramatically tomorrow. And even when things are going relatively well for us, most people have a gnawing fear of the future. German leader Otto von Bismarck commented on this. He said that life's like being at the dentist, in that you fear that the worst is yet to come. Well, what's the proper attitude? Well, the proper attitude, according to the great thinkers, is this. Acknowledge the reality that no one has it made in this life. That life rarely works the way one wants it to. That life rarely works as smoothly as we would like it to. There is some suffering in everyone's life. All the great religions teach this. All the great philosophers teach this. Again, that no one can escape this life without having done some significant suffering. Don't be fooled by all the smiling faces on television and in advertisements. I think a Buddhist monk provides some illumination here. This Buddhist monk is a chief assistant to the Dalai Lama. He has said this: deep inside, every one of us is carrying a very heavy load, in spite of our smiling faces and dignified appearance. As human beings, it is natural that we feel anger and frustration and even hatred. we are trying to suppress them. Compassion is the wisest attitude. It leads to less loneliness, in contrast to thinking that other people have it made. Some of the famous thinkers have talked about an ignorant heart being a chief cause of loneliness. An ignorant heart is one in which there is a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion, a lack of any positive feelings for other human beings. Perhaps the Virginia Tech mass murderer might have been someone with a very ignorant heart. And by the way, I say this with compassion. To be unconnected, even in one's heart with others, that's a terrible loneliness. Schopenhauer claimed that there is an inverse relationship between compassion and envy in us, that the more compassion we have for others, the less envy we have. And the less envy we have, the more compassion we have. Schopenhauer claimed that envy separates us from others. Compassion brings us together. Envy increases our loneliness. Compassion decreases our loneliness. Another important cause of loneliness concerns or involves deciding on the best way to live. You recall I've pointed out in many previous programs that Socrates said the most important question any one of us can ask himself or herself is this: how shall I live? How shall I live? What kind of job shall I try to secure? What values shall I live by? Shall I value status very much? Money? Wealth? Decency? Honesty? How much shall I value? Or should I value decency and honesty? How much should I value conformity or individuality? How much should I value having expensive possessions? And what role should religion play in my life, if any? And if religion is to play a role in my life, should I approach religion as being the literal truth or a metaphorical truth or metaphorical truths? How moral should I try to be in a world in which there is much evil? How moral should I try to be in acquiring money? How moral should I try to be in terms of acquiring a job promotion? We know that being very moral can be very lonely. Just ask any corporate or government whistleblower. Ask any political dissident languishing in jail in a totalitarian country. Again, whistleblowers, political dissidents can tell you how lonely being very moral can be. There is a consensus among the great thinkers that many people give lip service to morality, but that really self-interest and cynicism prevail. Socrates and Machiavelli both claimed that most people are more interested in appearing just than actually in being just. Mark Twain said that many people find goodness to be annoying. Twain said this: there is nothing so annoying as a good example. The example, for example, of it was kind of redundant, wasn't it? The example of a conscientious, virtuous teacher, or a conscientious, virtuous police officer, I should say. More on the loneliness of deciding on the best way to live. It involves answering the question, how shall I try to get peace of mind? Where shall I look for wisdom? Where shall I look for a guide to my life? Shall I look to television programs, advertising, pop music, movies, religion, books, my inner voice? Again, where should I look for a guide to how to live a better life? It can involve a certain loneliness, as all important decisions do. On the subject of religion, an important question each person, I think, must ask himself or herself is this. First of all, is there a God? Secondly, if so, which religion, if any, is the true religion? Roman Catholicism? Protestantism? And if Protestantism is the true religion, well, which denomination? Lutheranism, the Baptists, the Methodists, or some other denomination? Or is the Jewish religion the true religion? And if so, who's got it right? The Orthodox Jews, the Reformed Jews, or some other group of Jews? Or perhaps Islam is the true religion? If so, which sect? The Sunnis, the Shiites, the Sufis, or some other denomination or sect, I should say, of Islam? And of course, some people believe Hinduism is the only true religion. Some people believe that Shintoism, which is practiced in Japan, is the true religion. And of course, there are others who believe Buddhism is the most accurate religion. Another decision one has to make if one is deeply religious, or even relatively religious. Which holy book is the Word of God? Which holy book is the Word of God? The Bible? And if so, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, or the New Testament? Or is the Quran the Word of God? Or the Bhagavad Gita, a Hindu holy book? Is that the Word of God? Or some other holy book? Also, another question religious people, I think, must ask themselves. Who knows the mind of God? Who knows the mind of God? The Pope? Pat Robertson? Jerry Falwell? Prominent rabbis? Leading Muslim imams? Hindu leaders? Or someone else? Again, who knows the mind of God? Also, another lonely decision one sometimes has to make is this. What does one do when one's religious beliefs conflict with what one's intellect tells oneself is true? For example, what if one's religion says that using condoms is evil, or getting a divorce is evil, or that homosexuality is evil? But what if, in contrast to one's religious beliefs, what if one's intellect tells one, I don't think using a condom is evil. I don't think getting a divorce is evil. I don't think homosexuality is evil. What should one do when one's religious beliefs conflict with what one's intellect tells one is right or wrong? Indeed, some people claim religion has been given to us by God, but also some famous thinkers have claimed our intellects also have been given to us by God. Again, these decisions can involve much loneliness. As I said before, decision-making is often a lonely activity. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, may provide some illumination here. He said this, "Re-examine all you have been told in school or church or in any book, and dismiss what insults your soul." Is this good advice? What do you think? Kierkegaard, very famous Danish philosopher, said the most important human activity is decision-making. It's through our decisions that we create ourselves and our lives. The best movie I have ever seen, I saw many years ago. It's about the loneliness of a young European farm boy who at around the age of 14 or 15 sets out on his own to make a life for himself in a very evil world. The name of the movie, which I highly recommend, is Pele the Conqueror. The star is Max von Sydow. Again, the name of the movie, Pele the Conqueror. Again, the movie's about the loneliness of this boy, setting out to make a life for himself. Of course, there can be no greater joy in life than helping people in the often perilous journey through this mortal life. Indeed, perhaps helping people is the greatest way, the best way to deal with our own loneliness. Writer Kurt Vonnegut passed away recently. Vonnegut was one of my famous writers. And in a famous book he wrote, entitled God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, a book I highly recommend, Vonnegut summarized his philosophy. Vonnegut believed there is much madness and evil in this world, but that life can still be worthwhile. And again, in this book entitled God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, there is a segment where Mr. Rosewater is greeting new babies shortly after they come into the world. And here is how he addresses these babies. Hello, babies. Welcome to Earth. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. At the outside, babies, you'll be here about 100 years. There's only one rule I know of, babies. Only one rule I know of. And it's this. God damn it, you gotta be kind. Perhaps the best way to reduce one's loneliness in life is to be a happiness giver. And perhaps the loneliest people in the world are the happiness stealers. As usual, I'd like to conclude with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. In Walden, his masterpiece, Thoreau penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."